every time I had a child, I not only birthed a new human outside of my body, but I birthed a new human inside my body, right? Like I became a different version of myself. And that's a good thing, but it's also a challenging thing, right? There are differences to your body, and a lot of things can completely recover. And some things are going to be different, and that's going to be different for different people.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Good day. Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. My name is Dr. Michelle, and I practice in our Sudbury location.
And I am Dr. Heather Elford. I practice in our Brooklyn location.
And I'm Dr. Tracy-Lynn Reside, and I practice virtually in the North area and also in our Sudbury location.
And today we're talking about all things postpartum. We're going to be talking about physical health, emotional health, recovery, what to expect, what we could have done, wished we had done, all kind of takes on postpartum. What's really cool about this podcast, or we're hoping it's going to be really cool, is that we have three very different experiences that we're going to pull from. I myself have two little ones, one school-age kid and one newborn. We're just exiting the fourth trimester soon. If you ladies want to introduce yourselves in terms of your experiences.
Yeah, I have just had my first baby, and so today she's actually 8 weeks old.
And so for me, I have three. I have two teenagers and a toddler now. So I actually had the experience of having pregnancy in my 20s, a pregnancy in my 30s, and then what we affectionately don't call a geriatric pregnancy in my early 40s. So three very different postpartum experiences. So it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah. So Tracy-Lynn, start us off. Tell us a little bit about how those three experiences were in terms of whatever it is that you want to share.
Yeah. So, I think there's so many things that as I was reflecting on having this conversation today, that I looked at, like, what were the similarities in the postpartum experience, but they were also so different. And so with my first, we talk to lots of patients and work with lots of women in different stages of their pregnancy journeys. And the first postpartum experience, you just don't know anything, right? So, and I will say that part of it, the learning curve of having to fully take care of this new human, if you haven't experienced it, there's really nothing that can prepare you for it, right? You can, there's lots of support you can get around you, and we'll talk about that today, but it's just something that you have to do, you have to experience. And it caused I had a ton of anxiety. I had a lot of postpartum anxiety with my first. Was able to recognize it early enough on that, but it took a few weeks before I realized that I actually wasn't leaving my house as often. I was really struggling with decisions around sleeping and breastfeeding. I had some breastfeeding challenges with my first.
Actually,
Yeah.
I'm going to pause you there. I think this is actually a really good moment to talk about the differences between the baby blues and postpartum anxiety and depression, because I think that a lot of people don't really know the differences, and people are like, oh, you need to screen, you got to look out for it. And you're like, what's that mean? And it's funny because even as a naturopathic doctor, a trained doula, a mom of two, I'm like, I still too was like, where's the line? Like, what's the difference, right? And so in terms of the baby blues, for those who may not know, it can be shifts in mood that we see generally in the first 2 weeks postpartum that aren't debilitating, I would say, that like are still very unpleasant, can be very intense, can include tears, worry, anxiety, what have you, sleeplessness. That being said, they should improve kind of at that 2-ish week mark and shouldn't include things like trigger warning. Again, we're going to be talking about all things mental health, and that's going to include intrusive thoughts and potential suicide ideation. So for anybody who might not want to hear or discuss any of those things, this may not be the episode for you. But that period of time should not include those things, that we shouldn't have any psychosis, absence of a touch with reality, anything to that nature. So if we're hitting that level, no longer the baby blues. And if we're really struggling beyond those 2 weeks, that's when we're really starting to look at postpartum anxiety and depression. And in terms of when to seek support, because I think that that's another thing that people are like, well, where's mine? When do I have to wonder? If we're starting to wonder, it's time, right? That we don't actually need to meet the diagnostic criteria for PPA or PPD to warrant investigating that, right? Or like supporting that. And support can very much look like therapy. It can look like reaching out to your naturopath in order to make sure that, nutrients are up to snuff, that hormones like the thyroid isn't playing a big part in what's going on with all this, et cetera, et cetera. There are herbs that can be helpful. And then truthfully, medication can be life-saving. And so making sure that we're tackling those things. Anything that you ladies kind of want to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's important to note about how common it is as well. Like baby blues can affect up to 80% of postpartum patients. And so that can be extremely common. Like a lot of people will experience that versus postpartum depression. We usually see rates like around 10 to 20%. And postpartum anxiety, even like up to 40% of patients. So I feel like that is helpful to know even going into it. And one thing too that I think I've been learning through my whole postpartum experience as well is that like that postpartum depression can also show up like within the first year. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, I just had my baby, I'm having all of those symptoms. Like this is something that my care providers keep checking in with me about too, being like, okay, maybe you feel good, like you're riding this like baby high and you're having all of these like ups and downs of different feelings, but like that postpartum depression can even show up later on. So there is no shame and no harm in like getting that support and getting that evaluation. If even you're 6 months out postpartum and you're like, oh, like this is kind of creeping up on me. And then also getting kind of that evaluation support.
Yeah, in my experience with the anxiety piece, it was intrusive thoughts that really started, that just thoughts of visions of the baby rolling out of the bed, like and at first you're not sure, is this normal, is this not, and you just don't have any contact. So and I think any point where you're starting to have those kind of questions, reach out to your care provider, reach out to your village, big or small, because what you'll find is that baby blues piece and what is entailed there is quite common, as we were saying. But the other more intense feelings of depression, anxiety, many people have them, and I think it's important to normalize that it is difficult, and that blues and feelings and feeling like you're on a roller coaster are part of postpartum, but it shouldn't be so intense that it's actually interrupting sort of the quality of life in your experience, right? And that's where there are so many different levels and places that you can get support. And the more support that you have in this journey, that is one common through postpartum, is where you can get support. And we're all in, different circumstances. And in each of my pregnancies, I had different levels of support, but pulling in on support that you do have is never a bad idea. It's always going to be helpful.
And I think it's really helpful when we're talking about postpartum planning. I think a lot of people in birth really are like, especially the first pregnancy, we're focusing on the nursery, we're focusing on birth, and like, what is postpartum? And I'm like, nope, we got that wired wrong. And like definitely something that I did different with pregnancy number 2 was that I'm like, 1, nursery was already done. But 2, I'm like, birth matters 100%, never going to fight with that. Postpartum is debatably forever, but it's certainly a good chunk of time. It's more than 12 weeks. It's more than 8 weeks. It's more than the first year. Like that postpartum, there's a certain part of us that never really goes back to being the person that we were prior to. Our brains have changed, which is adaptive and important and evolutionary, I think. But nonetheless, that I think big things that we can do to plan for postpartum is actually having a therapist on the planned for the other side. Whether you've accessed their care before, totally fine if you don't have that. But I think it's really, really helpful to have some names ahead of time, because it can be really hard to try to initiate therapy if you've never done it before. And at the very least, even just finding somebody that you know, like, and trust. And when you're sleep deprived and mental health isn't doing so great, that becomes even harder to access. My other caveat being that if you see a medical provider and they don't necessarily provide you with the care that you're looking for, seek somebody else, continue to go. And that can be a challenge. Again, accessing care with us can be difficult at times. And that's where as much prep we can do, I think the better, just because it can be hard to acknowledge and admit, so to speak, to struggling, depending on what stories and traumas that we carry from previous, right? Another thing that I found to be really, really helpful that my therapist shared with me is that the difference in terms of when things are considered PPA, PPD is really the degree of suffering that you're experiencing. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you've hit a certain threshold, but if you're not able to also enjoy, and you're not supposed to enjoy every minute of pregnancy and postpartum, just so we're clear, that's a phallus. That's a lie. It's not a thing. But that if you're struggling to enjoy any of it, or we're really anxious and we're not able to be present, that again, we want to make sure that we're avoiding grief on the other side of this when you are no longer experiencing those things, and that it's important for your health, but it's also important for baby's health, that having a parent, particularly the primary parent, and if that's mom in this case, is really crucial for baby's development and for attachment and their mental health kind of coming down the road. So it's really a service to both you and your baby when you take care of your mental health in that way. So I think that that's worthwhile mentioning. I too experienced some of the baby blues with my first. The first 2 weeks were definitely one of these things where the sunset would come, and I was the anxiety about nighttime would happen. And I was just we got to turn on my favorite lights, and we put on Friends, the happy show, and we're just gonna coast and do all the things to make sure I'm in my happy cocoon, and we're just gonna ride this wave. And I was able to get away with that round one. Round two, there's definitely been more mood changes in terms of, for myself personally, this pregnancy was rough in terms of some things going on in my life. And I think that definitely played into the postpartum experience. But again, making sure that we're accessing that care makes a really, really big difference. And it doesn't mean you have to feel like crap for the rest of it.
With our first in particular, I think you spend so much time planning, right? You have a birth plan. This is how I want things to go. And you have, even if you're not feeling well or there's, complications, you have a different level of engagement because you're not taking care of other humans yet. And so I think that planning is important, but we tend to plan on specific details, I think, in my experience in working with patients or my own experience. And that's good. It's good to have goals. It's good to have plans. It's good to have what you're looking for. But there's just so much that's unpredictable about having a human, a new human. You don't know who that new human is going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. And you don't know who you're going to be on the other side of it. So planning for some flexibility and planning to have supports in place postpartum is just not focused on enough. And whether it's definitely looking at mental health, depending on your care provider, understanding and asking the questions before you give birth. What does postpartum care look like in this particular practice? It's different in certain hospitals with certain OBs, with certain midwives. Maybe you have a primary care provider, maybe you don't, maybe you have a naturopathic doctor, but even booking some of those visits out well ahead of time so that you know where your check-ins are going to be, because you don't know what's going to happen in between. So if you can, whatever sort of support lattice you can put in place before is going to help. And if, there's no straightforward postpartum experience, because regardless, you're going to be sleep deprived, and that makes everything harder. But it's, things are generally, going well, you still need that support. But there's always going to be something that doesn't go the way that you were expecting. And so having that lattice in place is something that I don't think we talk enough about. In worst case scenario, you can cancel an appointment if you don't need it, right? But really understanding, what capacity you have to have those in place. And again, some of us are in different circumstances. We can we can have multiple care practitioners, and some of us, with my first pregnancy, I actually was a single parent, and I was still in naturopathic school. So I had the support of my colleagues, but I didn't have, healthcare coverage or anything else. So I really did rely on, I was with a midwife at that time, and they were able to keep me on in their practice for an extended period of time because I asked, so there's like that, just that in and of itself was really beneficial for me. So I think that lattice piece is something we just don't focus on. We think about birth plans, we think about and even in my other pregnancies where postpartum, again, the breastfeeding and those kind of things, it really, and even I had my last two kids were 10 years apart. And I will say that it was kind of like riding a bike. Now, different baby, there were different challenges, but that it really does change who you are and change your brain. And when I had my third, it was like I just picked it up and those pieces of it. I was worried, am I going to remember how to do this? It's been so long. The difference was now I had two teenagers to take care of as well, right? So, and like you, Michelle, you have a school-aged kid to take care of, and that adds a different level of dynamic. But coming into that lattice piece of having those supports in place and thinking about what you might need ahead of time is going to make a huge difference. And worst case scenario, if you don't need it, that's great, right? So,
100%. Heather, can you tell us a little bit about your postpartum experiences and what things you found to be really helpful and what things maybe not so much?
Yeah, so I'm definitely fresh in it right now, nice in the thick of all the newborn stage, which has been really fun. And I think on top of all of this conversation about support, I think a really big thing for me has actually been like my family and my community, and also getting to know new moms in the area as well, and how supportive that has been. Because there's so many times that you have an experience and you're like, am I the only one that's experiencing this? Like for me, one of those kind of like weird intrusive thoughts that I've had is that I will wake up in the middle of the night and I will think that I'm still nursing my baby and that I've lost her in the covers. And I'm like, the number of times that I wake up and do that, I'm like, is anybody else experiencing that? And talking to other moms, they're like, oh yeah, we all have felt that same way. Like, I think that really helps to normalize the experience and helps to like get you to feel like, okay, I'm not alone in all of this and all of those things. So for me, honestly, like I've had I've had a very positive postpartum experience so far. And I really do think a lot of that has been the support that I had set up ahead of time as well. Definitely my partner has been really, really supportive, and we had lots of conversations ahead of time about what postpartum would look like, how we were going to share roles and responsibilities. And I think that was like very, very helpful. And I think that's something that I would recommend all of my patients also working through and doing as they're preparing for postpartum, because yeah, how are you going to figure that out when you're both sleep deprived? And how are you going to figure out feedings and changing and what that looks like? And so him and I have had a lot of open communication of being like, okay, what do you need today? Like, do you need a nap? Do you need to get out of the house? Do you need to walk? And so I think that's made a really big difference for me in my experience. So yeah, I would say like a huge benefit is just being able to have some types of support. And I totally understand and respect that not everybody has their direct partner or the father that's there, but being able to have some type of other support, whether that's family members or friends or like moms, whatever that looks
like. A doula, like they have postpartum doulas for this exact reason, right? Exactly. And they're like, they don't get enough praise for like the God work that they do.
Absolutely. So being able to like set all of that up even ahead of time and thinking about that, I think that really can change your postpartum experience for sure.
100%. I think that when it comes to the postpartum planning, to add to that, I think sleep planning is a big one, because I think a lot of people, especially first timers, are like, oh, well, my baby's going to sleep in their bassinet and everything will be chill and wonderful and easy. And I'm like, all right, fun fact, my daughter was, I think, like a glorious sleeper for the most part. Like she was kind of a trick baby in that way. The first first 2 weeks was aggressive, knock your teeth in. But then once we got past that, she slept in her bassinet and it wasn't like a big challenge. And I was just like, I'm really good at this sleep thing. Like, I'm really good at sleep hygiene. Like, I did the taking care of babies, like newborn course, which I do recommend to people because I think that there's like really helpful information about like wake windows and sleepy cues and hunger cues and kind of loosely some information that you can cherry pick from, and was really helpful for me. And so I was like, I'm just really good at like the sleep stuff. And then my second was born and I was like, nope. I just got lucky with the first. I'm like, I don't know anything about anything. And so I think it's helpful to also make plans for like, what if you don't have a baby who sleeps in their bassinet? What if you don't have, quote unquote, a good sleeper? Because sleep is so critical when we're talking about like you doing well in terms of physical or emotional recovery postpartum and what that looks like. And so really making sure that we're prioritizing that as best we can, whether that be a schedule of like who's up and who's down, or I'm going to say some taboo stuff here. Everybody may not like this, and that's totally okay. But discussing if you absolutely have to co-sleep for the sake of your sanity, that like that's okay, but how can you do that safely? And so looking into what that entails in terms of like firm surface and nobody in the bed who has been influenced under any drugs or alcohol, no like crazy sheets and things. Maybe this means your partner isn't sleeping with you if you have a mattress that's like sunk in and baby's gonna get smushed in between. Like it's really about, or like, is this where we have like a bassinet that can pull up beside the bed where like you guys can be side by side, or whatever the case might be. Like there's 1,000 variations on what sleep can look like. But I think even just having a little bit of a like what to do in case your plan A doesn't go well can be helpful. Because again, when you're sleep deprived and you're like, what do we do? What do we believe in? What are we comfortable with? Because it, like, again, sleep, prioritizing that is number one. I think the other things that are really, really helpful is if you're planning on nursing and that's important to you, making sure that you have lactation supports in place, because breastfeeding is like, it seems like one of these things where you're like, oh, it's natural and we all find our way together and it's beautiful and easy. And I'm like, I've never found anything less natural in my life where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. You haven't a clue. This is the blind leading the blind in like the world's worst way. And so having lactation support is really, really important, because if baby actually isn't transferring enough milk, that becomes like pretty urgent, pretty fast in terms of like, you need to do something. Baby needs to be fed. And two, if your nipples are getting damaged because of latch or whatever might be going on, even if we're pumping and we're not using the right flange sizes, what have you, that like nipple damage is really hard to overcome, because now that you have damage, you need to feed on top of that damage, right? So like trying to heal while you have this ongoing source of injury is no joke. So again, having places where you can have intervention ASAP so that we can recover or prevent injury and keep that nursing relationship in a good place. Because in my experience, and this is only my experience, I found nursing to be so challenging until it wasn't. And then it's the easiest thing ever, where I'm just like, no bottles. I don't have to plan for anything. I can go anywhere and it's fantastic. Not to say that that isn't emotional labor and like the touching out piece and all of that, but that it, for me, was really hard until it wasn't. And so making sure that you have supports in place to protect that, if that's something that's important to you, can be a game changer. How were your experiences, ladies, when it came to postpartum and lactation and all that jazz?
Yeah, for me, I am at the moment exclusively breastfeeding, so definitely in the thick of it. And my little girl is very hungry and has gone through a lot of cluster feeding. So I feel like emotionally for me, and I've told this to my husband so many times, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if my baby likes me or she just wants me for my milk. And so I think there's like there's so many thoughts that come up during postpartum as well. And being like, okay, I feel like I'm just like a milk machine all the time. Like that is kind of how I feel. I feel like we're starting to kind of get out of that, but definitely in the first few weeks, I was strapped to the couch a lot of the time, and I would be like, okay, I fed you, you're fine for a little bit. And then like 20 minutes later, she's like, no, I'm still hungry. And so there's like a lot of feelings that come up in that. And so I just want to normalize that for anyone who's also in the thick of going through all of that as well. And so, yeah, for me too, my priority was I knew that if I had feeding down, then everything else was going to be a lot easier. When I was in my 4th year at CCNM at the naturopathic college, I also worked with a lactation consultant. She was an ND doula lactation consultant. So I was like working with her in her breastfeeding clinic. And so it was really helpful to learn a lot of like those initial basics. But the very first day that I could get my baby in, we went right down to that, like to her clinic. And I was like, okay, let's make sure that latch is good. Let's make sure flow is good. Let's make sure all of those things are good, because once you get there, if you are nursing, it feels easier to get out of the house. Like it feels easier to be like, if I need to nurse my baby like on a dime, I can do that because I feel like I'm feeling more comfortable with it. So again, I reiterate, get that support. Like if that's your goal and you like want to feed, whether that's like exclusively breastfeeding or a combination or any of those things, like support is always beneficial.
Yeah, and I would even say, especially with your first, because we're all naturopathic doctors here. We learn a lot of this in our education, but most people don't have that knowledge, right? And even with that knowledge, I remember having that, with my first, having this sort of like, well, I know this stuff, it will be fine, and it was not. I very much. We had some shoulder dystocia during my delivery, and so there was some recovery there. And she had a tiny little face, and just the latch was really narrow. And so I did have the experience of having to nurse through a pretty significant fissure, which is not fun. But part of it was that I didn't get that. Again, you're sort of, it was really, quite frankly, a judgment piece. Like I should be able to do this, right? And so, I probably waited about 10 days before I went and got help. And I'll never forget with my first, it's sort of like, it's like I felt like I had to set everything up properly, the pillow and and it took so long to figure out. And then we had the issues that we had and had to nurse through some pretty painful stuff. But once the latch, like once we were able to solve the latch and figure out what was going on, and it was like Michelle said, it was almost like a switch where that piece just fell into place. And then because I had learned the mechanics, there's one thing to learn about it, but there's another thing to learn about it when you're actually doing it, right? And because of that, breastfeeding with my other two was, both of them were breastfeeding within 3 or 4 minutes of being born with a good latch, because you just start to look right, but it does not come naturally. And then that's not to say that's going to be everyone's experiences, because you could know how to breastfeed, you can have 5 kids, but then you've got one with a tongue tie or some other latch issue. So, but you can feel the difference. So, and I think it really does. It really, if you want to breastfeed, and that's the choice that you get to make, it's one of those pieces where one visit with a lactation consultant can literally be life-changing. So it was definitely, and I really did judge myself, and it's something that I feel like, to get that message out of like, it actually is, like Michelle said, one of the least natural experiences of my life. And to realize that I have not talked to a single woman in my 15 years of practice who didn't say the same thing, that especially with the first one, that it's hard. Right?
That yes, no, I think that that's entirely true. I do want to make mention of something that people may not know about, and I think it's worthwhile because one of the goals with this podcast today is really to break the stigma and to provide education and resources to people so that their postpartum experience can be as good as it possibly can be. But there is a condition where when letdown happens, the milk ejection reflex, that some women experience really intense emotional feelings, like it can be dread. It's called D-MER. Dysphoric milk ejection reflex is what it stands for. And so just know that if you are experiencing D-MER, where like you're having what might feel like PPA or PPD kind of just for short periods of time while milk is being let down, that is a specific situation, and like supports can be put in place to help you through that. But just know that that's something that can happen, because I think a lot of people who experience that, again, just don't know that it's a thing, right? Like there's so many versions of what can happen postpartum, and people don't necessarily know. my other just quick throwing out all the zebras today so that we're covering our bases. I forget the name of the condition, but if anybody is nursing and they're building a stash in their freezer, there is, in some situations, an enzyme, I believe, that is missing or present, where milk doesn't taste good after being frozen. And oftentimes people will go to give their children that milk and they won't drink it, but they'll drink freshly expressed milk. And they're like, what gives? Like, it's not the bottle. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it called again? Tell us a little bit about that, will you?
I was trying to think of it. It has to do with a lipase enzyme. So it has to do with the fats. There's a couple different ways. So I ended up, I went back to school when my first was 4 weeks old. So I was breastfeeding and pumping. And mostly she was with me, but there was like 3 or 4 hours and people would bring her into the clinic. It was a whole community event. But I was trying to pump and freeze. And actually with my second, I had a colleague who had a child at the same time, and I actually ended up feeding both of the babies for about 8 weeks till her milk came in. There were some complications. So what I ended up having to do was actually scald the milk first if I was going to freeze it, to neutralize I think in my case, I had too much of the enzyme. So what happened, it was actually break down the fats. And so when you freeze it actually separates and does not smell appealing whatsoever. Scalding it would help. And
scalding it, for those who don't know, is heating it to a specific
so just like really fast. Yeah. And it doesn't take too long, but when you're tired and everything else, and it's really, so I sort of, I had to learn that one the hard way. So it's one of those things where you very quickly tell once you freeze it and thaw it, if it looks separated or the baby won't use it, then you can consult with an ND or your other healthcare provider, and they can let you know sort of some ideas. But it's really disheartening to have a stash of milk that then all of a sudden you can't use, right? So, and for me, I had to do something before I could freeze it. So I needed to know that. But I think that likens to something that I've been thinking about as you were talking, Michelle, in terms of resources. I think it's really important. We talked about the stigma and normalizing things, but I also think that can go too far, where, that there are nutrient deficiencies and severe consequences, like physical consequences to sleep deprivation. Cases where, I would say like having a baby is like having, like an iron sucker in your system. And then you can come out being like, I think when I had my second, my ferritin was 3 after about when for
those who don't know, ferritin should be between 50 and 80. So like that's nearly non-detectable. That's really not good.
That's like transfusion level iron. So I think, and again, depending on your personality, you might be on the side of sort of, well, this is normal. I just need to do it. I just need to put up with it. And I think that it shouldn't be this hard. And so, while yes, we want to normalize and destigmatize all of these conversations about postpartum, we also want to make sure that ask,
get tested.
Tested. Work with obviously we're biased, but work with a naturopathic doctor, because they will be able to sort of help you through that. Is this postpartum blues and sleep deprivation, or is there something else that needs to be investigated? And so we don't want to miss those things either, because it's already difficult. But if if our body needs something or something else is going on, postpartum thyroid can often go awry, and then that gets missed, right? So yes, we want to normalize it, but also we don't want to miss those things. So getting that support and help, again, comes back to,
It's so true. Being a mom is so not a diagnosis, and it's one that's handed out all the time. It was handed out to me, and I was really offended because I was reaching out for help. And I'm like, I, as an educated person in the field, am saying I need help, and you're just like, you're good. It's a non-issue. We're not even going to do labs. And I'm like, so it's one of these things where it happens. But yes, if you don't feel well, the real answer is seek out support, be it through whatever avenue that looks like. And it can be an and moment, and that might be a challenge, but that it's a worthwhile thing for sure to make sure that we're not normalizing the struggle. either, that like there is some degree of struggle that is inherently human and inherently part of postpartum, but it isn't supposed to be that hard.
Yeah, I feel like I really appreciate that because just having seen moms in practice and now obviously being a mom myself, often what happens is that in pregnancy, you're thinking, okay, we're watching mom, we're watching baby. And then as soon as baby arrives, it's like, oh my goodness, all the attention ends up going on baby and mom just gets forgotten about. And so I see so many moms where they maybe are a year out postpartum, maybe even longer. And I'm like, when was the last time you had any labs done? And they're like, when I was pregnant. And so there's so many times that we're just missing the mom in that whole piece. But if mom is in a really, really good state, then baby's going to be in a better state too. Like we really do need to make sure that you're in a good state as a mom so that you can better care for your baby as well.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
In terms of, let's talk about what were some things that you guys wished you knew that we haven't already covered, or things that you would do differently this time around, or, you know, hypothetically, if we were to have more children, I will not. I don't think Tracy-Lynn is, but nonetheless, in those situations to help people, what are some things that you think are helpful to know?
I feel like for me, I don't think I realized how much perineal healing you would need to go through postpartum. I think
Especially the first time.
Definitely, yeah. So I'm like fine to share that I had some tearing because I had a vaginal delivery. And I don't think I really expected like how uncomfortable I was going to be, especially for that first week. Like I remember learning as even a doula, as a naturopathic doctor, like, okay, we can do sitz baths, we can do herbs, we can do all of these things. But when you're in the thick of it, you're like, all I want is just like ice. Just put like a big ice pack on me. And I wasn't expecting like how long I was going to be in diapers for and all of these things. Like there's just a lot that kind of happened within that first little bit postpartum that I don't think a lot of people had kind of talked to me about or warned me about. And so almost like for me, it almost felt like birth, at least I knew was going to end at some point, but like the discomfort that I felt postpartum was like a constant kind of discomfort for at least a week, maybe a little bit longer for me personally. So I think that was something that I'm going to be a lot more like aware of talking to my patients about as well in the future, being like, okay, what are some good strategies that you can have on hand that is going to be supportive for that perineal healing? And how can we just like help that process and also feel like moms can talk about what that feels like as well, because I think that wasn't really discussed to me a lot beforehand.
And it's something that is going to be different with every pregnancy, right? So it's good again to be prepared and have some idea, but you just don't know. I remember with my second, and I had very long deliveries with all three kids. So it took me 36 hours to get from 6 to 10 centimeters every single time, which was fun. But with my second, you know, I was up and walking within like hours. There was no, like, it just felt like a breeze. Not the case with my first. And with my third, it was 2 weeks before all three were vaginal deliveries, but it was just a different experience. I had different things going on. So the physical sort of experience with the first, that's the first time your body's done that. So there's going to be a certain amount of trauma, which takes time to recover from. But it was actually my third when I wasn't expecting, right? So I would say like that preparation and those ideas, like have some ice packs on hand. And I know with my patients, I always give them some of these sort of have this stuff ahead of time because you may not need it, but don't assume that because you didn't need it with one pregnancy that you might not need it with the next. So Yeah. I was almost 2 weeks before I could actually walk up and downstairs with my third. Wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it's like insurance. You want to need it, not you want to have it, not need it.
Not need it,
Like
yeah.
that, you want to have perineal healing stuff, but not need it. But it's funny. I had two very different experiences. Both were vaginal births. My first, I was also in labor for like days, it seemed. And my second was precipitous, like from start to finish was a couple hours. And that happened at home in the water. So like one had lots of intervention, one had none or very little. And both of my babies were OP. So for people who don't know, that means that they were sunny side up, which increases their head circumference by a significant enough amount when we're talking about, again, a small hole and a large person coming out of it. And so that really made a difference. But what's funny is that I had a second degree tear with both. And my first was a little bit more challenging in terms of recovery. And my second didn't require repair, meaning like it didn't require any stitching because it laid nicely and healed fantastically and was like a non-issue. So I hear a lot of patients who are like deeply concerned about tearing, where they're like, this is the worst. And there can be some more minor tears that can cause a lot of discomfort and, disability, so to speak, in terms of can we walk and where friction lies and all that. And there can be more significant tears that are like a no big deal. But again, it's, I think, really important to make sure that you have a little bit of a plan in that situation so that hopefully you don't need it and you're like, stuff I could gift to somebody else, but helpful to have on hand. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention pelvic floor physiotherapy in all of this. That for those who don't know, pelvic floor physiotherapists are like physiotherapists for the basin of your pelvis. And that can be really helpful when we're talking pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, anyways. But if you're having leaking, if you're having pain with intercourse, heaviness, anything, like if you just have discomfort in your pelvic Netherlands, just make sure that you're reaching out to a pelvic floor physiotherapist. They are experts in this. I don't know that anyone can help quite as much as they do. So make sure that you reach out to somebody who does that.
Yeah. I think in the one thing that for me with all three that, and even with my third, I didn't necessarily plan this as well as I wasn't expecting to have it wasn't a tear issue. It was just, I don't know if it was my age, and I had a bit of a postpartum hemorrhage that was easily controlled, but I just was not expecting not to be able to move very much for those. So for me, it was food. The one thing I will say is just like, like next to sleep, making sure that mom is eating regularly, like requires a full-scale intervention, I think. So whether it's the people around or you have frozen meals or you do what you need to do, but, and especially if, well, not especially, but I found it particularly challenging the more mouths I had to feed, right? So like, well, now I've got 2 teenagers at home and what's the plan for that? And so, if people are asking how they can help, that's how they can help, right? Like I'm always like, bring food.
Yeah, bring food or gift cards.
Bring frozen lasagnas, whatever it is. But like, and don't be afraid to ask, right? Like for, if people are saying people want to help, and it's not always, and actually it's very rarely take the baby or change a diaper. It's actually, you know what, I would really love it if you would clean my toilet or those little things that just aren't necessarily going to get done. And like I said, with my first, I didn't have a partner. And so, relying on people who did. And it was a hard conversation sometimes to have. I was like, I really don't need you to sit here and hold my baby. What I need to do is like, if you want to help me, this is how you can help me. And food was the big one. So
I actually have that written down beside me, is that I think when people are like, what's important to put on my registry? I'm like, a freezer. Like if you don't have a freezer, you need a freezer. No, seriously. Like I'm like, it's so true. It's the most helpful thing, because then you can stockpile it with food. And again, this is also coming from a place of privilege that I want to acknowledge in terms of like, again, having support, having access to finances that allow you to stock a freezer, like having people around you. And so I just want to acknowledge that, because that may not be the case for everyone. And that might be a challenging thing to come to terms with. But for those who do have the ability, having a freezer on your registry, if you don't already possess one, is fantastic. Batch cooking meals. One of the things that I loved, super cubes, they're like a silicone mold, and they have like various different shapes and sizes. So I'd like make chili and like would freeze like 1 cup portions of all of that or 2 cup portions of all of that. So that if I'm having lunch and it's just me, I might pull out a certain amount of that. Whereas if I'm feeding the whole darn family, I'm pulling out a lot more, but it gave me the flexibility of doing that. So like slow cooker meals are great, whatever it is that you enjoy. But I found that I prepped a ton of food. I'm still, like I said, I'm 3 months-ish postpartum, and I still have a ton of food in my freezer that I'm working my way through. And it does make a huge difference. Food is major.
Yeah, and it's so easy in the postpartum period to forget to eat. Constant. And that has all kinds of consequences, right? In terms of milk production, your own well-being, being able to sleep, your blood sugar, and that's all going to impact the baby. And it is.
And your physical recovery.
Yeah, right. All of that. And it's just remarkably, well, of course, you're completely obsessed with this human being that you just brought into the world in all the good and difficult, challenging ways. And it's very easy not to take care of yourself. So food and sleep are the two things that, any way that anyone can support you there, that's the best place. So
absolutely.
I also want to speak to like anybody else who is either pumping or breastfeeding and just talking about like the hunger that you feel. I don't know if that was either of your experiences, but it is insane. Like, I don't remember being that hungry in pregnancy compared to how I am now and feeding a baby. And so, yeah, even more so, like making sure that you are getting enough food. I also know that, like, having seen moms in practice before and talking with them about nutrition, so many times they would say, oh, and I just like really struggle with lunch. I can't like get in lunch, and that's like a difficult meal. And I never understood it. And then I had a baby and I was like, oh yeah, like the middle of the day, you have no schedule. Everything is going crazy. And like, I don't think I've eaten since maybe.
You're nap trapped like half the time in the afternoon. Like they've fallen asleep on you and you can't get up.
Yeah. So definitely like meal prepping was one of the best things that I also did in prepping for postpartum, because you just go grab something high protein and then it just feels so much better.
I think having like really accessible snacks. So like this is where like nuts and seeds are really helpful to have on hand. One of my favorite things to like gift my postpartum friends is that I'm like, what are all your favorite nuts? And then what's your favorite like candy or like chocolate? And then I make them like a homemade trail mix. I'll go hit a bulk barn and like just put in their favorite things into it. And I'm like, I will absolutely throw in something sweet because there's something to be said about that regulating your nervous system, and I have no shame. But that nonetheless, like having like quick, tangible snacks, ideally things that are not just carbohydrates. Granted, carbs are important, especially if you're nursing. They're important if you're recovering. They're important for blood sugar balance too. So like not to knock them, but we don't want to be like surviving on Skittles. That's probably not going to be a means to you feeling good. So making sure that you have those things in place can be really, really, really helpful, just so you have some grab and go things, because inevitably there are days that go sideways when you have babies, and you can't have a full meal, and that's okay. But if you can reach for some nutritious things, and that's where we also really shine as providers, is helping people in terms of like, what is it that you like, what is it you don't, this is what we want to see, and then kind of troubleshooting for what that can look like is another place where we shine, I think. Any other things that you ladies think are really important postpartum before we wrap up?
I feel like an important thing to also talk about is like how your body image changes, or how your body literally changes through pregnancy and through postpartum. And there's just a lot of feelings about that can come up. I think too, like that also, it doesn't necessarily just have to be like stretch marks and weight gain and things like that. Like, especially for first time moms, I have not heard a lot of moms talk about how you also feel in your perineal or your vaginal area, and how that also can come up and kind of affect your self-esteem in that way too. Like, things can feel different if you've had a vaginal delivery, and that can also affect maybe how you feel about intimacy. And so working through some of those things and being open to talk about those things can be very helpful as well, because I think a lot of people experience it and then don't necessarily say anything because it's really sensitive.
I think most people truthfully experience that, whether it be like my pelvic floor has seen better days, and I have some diastasis recti, which is like abdominal wall separation. So my core and pelvic floor is not the same, and so there's definitely some challenges there. And I think it's exactly that, even just in terms of like strength and what you could do previously, and some grief around that can be super normal. But I try to tell people, and I have to, this is like my mantra right now, is that like it took 9 months to grow them. It's going to take at least 9 months to recover. And that's my at least one, right? That truthfully, at the end of the day, rehab can take a lot longer. For some people, it's less, and kudos for you. But I think just having some realistic expectations about what recovery looks like, and also having some realistic expectations about like what your capacity is going to be like postpartum, right? That like when you get that, like, is it 6 weeks clearance where they're like, have sex, resume activity, do life. And you're like, that's ludicrous. Like, your pelvic floor is working at something like 50% at the 6 week point. You really need to listen to your body. If we have prolapse, making sure that you're resting, or like whatever the case, but like you grew a person, you had a large wound, there was a lot of recovery. You're experiencing something called matrescence, which is becoming a parent, becoming a mother. And with that comes physical, emotional, brain changes, which we didn't really touch on, but to very loosely and unqualified to discuss this, is that, your brain experiences really big changes, both even in pregnancy, but in the postpartum period, where we might, Dr. Tracy-Lynn and I were talking about this earlier, but that you might have like what's called baby brain. And Tracy-Lynn, this might be a good point for you to kind of take over and speak to that, because you had said it so eloquently.
Yeah, there's research that's been coming out talking about, the changes that happen in our brains as we become mothers, and that evolutionarily there's this idea around baby brain not really existing, that it's really that we are meant to be hyper focused on this person. I did my master's some time ago in it's called social neuroendocrinology, so it's like brains and hormones and behavior. And part of that, we'll talk a little about sort of evolutionary psychology, and talking about like, why do we behave the way we behave, and why do our brains work the way that they work. But if you think about how human beings, we literally can't survive without somebody taking care of us. Love is it, right? And so it literally rewires the way that we focus on this person, because without that, horses are born and they're walking within a few minutes. We're born a little premature, right? So that way. So in terms of our development, so this idea around blaming something on baby brain, which is a very real experience, but it's actually an experience that is meant to be that way. And part of what happens is that we may not always have the supports around us, where we still have 800 things that we feel like we need to do, but our brains just they're not designed to do that in that moment. So it's not that we're losing our capacity, it's that we've actually shifted what our focus needs to be. And I think that's the thing that I really, having had 3 at different stages of my life, is that every time I had a child, I not only birthed in a human outside of my body, but I birthed in a human inside my body, right? Like I became a different version of myself each time that I had a child. And it is a, so we talk about recovery taking 9 months or 3 years, and I still would say I'm almost 3 years out from my last. I'm nowhere near, because nothing is ever going to go back to the way that it was, right? There was always you are a new person. And that's a good thing, but it's also a challenging thing, right? There are differences to your body, and a lot of things can completely recover, and some things are going to be different, and that's going to be different for different people. I was lucky not to have diastasis for any of my pregnancies, but I often say that, like, I've been breastfeeding for a total of 7 years now, and my upper body will never be the same. And that's a struggle. And you have conversations around intimacy and how you feel about that. And you have those conversations with my partner, is like, just like, and it's sensation changes, and that's just part of it. So But yeah, so I think that's the big one for me, is that you will become again and again and again, and normalizing that piece, understanding that is part of being a mother, it's part of that matrix. And each child, I found that I had a new evolution.
Yeah.
I feel like I love that, because I don't know about like you, Dr. Michelle, but definitely I see a lot on social media. So many reels kind of tailored to me about like bouncing back and losing the baby weight. And I just want to give permission to anybody, if that's where you're at, if you're in the thick of postpartum and you're getting that, like, it's okay to unfollow things and be
I
really
encourage it.
about not like listening to all of those kind of like that information. Because yeah, I agree, Dr. Tracy-Lynn, that it is like this whole process of becoming this new person. And I think that's a more positive way to understand it and go through that process. And there may be some grieving in that as well. And so again, like full circle, like having that therapist support, having that mental health support to kind of work through that is also really, really helpful. But you do not have to bounce back after your postpartum experience. You grew a human, and that's a huge deal.
Well, and I think what's, I've done other podcasts with Dr. Sarah, where we were talking about body image and disordered eating, which is part of my background. So very interesting challenges around body image, and I think that's a whole nother podcast, quite frankly. But what I can say is that when you do get some of those supports in place, and you recognize that this is part of the thought processes and just physical processes that you will experience in the postpartum period, that there is a beautiful opportunity to explore body image and what your body can do and has just done. And with the right types of supports, I think that narrative starts to change. We all know we don't have a healthy narrative around female body image in our culture. But I think that the more that we have these kinds of conversations, it really does provide an opportunity. And certainly was my experience, where, I mean, I literally have an entirely different body size and body shape, having, my daughter in my late 20s to being postpartum in my mid 40s. But I feel so different about my body in such a more positive way, and what it can do, and what my expectations are, what bouncing back would look like are different now. But that required support. It required a whole journey in and of itself. So
I really want to thank the both of you for sharing all of like your experiences and all of the information and the knowledge. I think the big takeaway that I heard throughout all of our speaking was really that seeking out support is key, that there are a number of challenges in postpartum that are normal. You are not alone. Like, there's no version of this where you are alone. If you have experienced it, it is without question that at least one mother somewhere else in the planet has experienced it also. Finding your group of mom people, whether those be friends or mom groups or hired mom group therapy, whatever the case might be, that is hugely helpful, just in terms of like helping to quiet that narrative that I am alone. But yes, I just want to thank the both of you. We really hope that this podcast is helpful for those who are listening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.